You descend into the labyrinth, built thousands of years ago on the island of Crete, the very place where, according to legend, the Minotaur once lurked. But here, among the cold stone walls, myths come alive. The fears of the past become tangible, and reality itself gradually loses its clear boundaries. You are venturing where no sane person would dare to go, to face not only the shadows of antiquity, but also your own fears. But before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is there. I am truly curious to see who has joined us. Now, make yourself comfortable. We are about to begin. You approach the entrance to the labyrinth, buried beneath layers of grass and weeds, as if the earth itself had decided to take pity on ancient architecture and hide it from prying eyes. The stone archway is not grand or imposing. Rather, it slumps wearily, exhausted by the centuries that have pressed upon its back. The stories say this labyrinth was built by the infamous craftsman Daedalus under the command of King Minos, whose penchant for the dramatic was matched only by his talent for making questionable decisions. The entrance is unguarded, the only sign of life being a few lizards who scuttle away as you pass. You hesitate, naturally. It is not every day that you are invited to walk the same corridors where, according to legend, the monstrous Minotaur once hunted for his prey. Before stepping inside, you reflect on what little is known, fact and fiction alike, about Minoan civilization. The Minoans, who flourished on the island of Crete several thousand years ago, were as fond of grand gestures as they were of bulls. Archaeologists, with their brushes and endless patience, have uncovered fragments of pottery, half collapsed frescoes, and the occasional rusted blade, all suggesting a people who loved ritual, pageantry, and possibly elaborate mazes. The labyrinth itself has become a symbol for all things confusing and circuitous, from bureaucratic paperwork to tangled relationships. Yet in its heyday, it was rumored to be an architectural marvel, a place where one could get lost physically, spiritually, and for the more careless, permanently. You recall the legends of sacrifices, the tales whispered in the darkness by those who believed that gods demanded tribute and monsters lurked just out of sight. The Minoans supposedly sent young men and women into the labyrinth, not with hope, but as an offering, payment for the sins or misfortunes of their people. The myths have a way of growing larger than life, and it is difficult to separate the truth from the storytelling. Was the Minotaur a living beast, a metaphor, or just a cautionary tale for disobedient children? No one knows, and it is unlikely that anyone ever will. The only certainty is the lingering unease that seeps from the ancient stones, as if they remember more than they let on. You step over the threshold. The first corridor is cold and smells faintly of damp earth and old regrets. The floor is made of uneven stone slabs, worn smooth by the passage of countless nervous feet. Moss grows in the cracks, and here and there you notice remnants of torch sconces, long, empty, jutting out from the walls like skeletal fingers. Some of the stones are etched with markings, perhaps names or prayers, or just the desperate attempts of former visitors to leave behind a message, a warning, or proof of their existence. Your footsteps echo softly, multiplying into an army of ghostly travelers, all of whom seem just as lost as you. The path bends sharply, then doubles back on itself in a way that suggests the architect was either very clever or deeply spiteful. It is difficult to imagine what it must have been like all those centuries ago to enter these corridors knowing there might be no exit. The torches of the past are gone, replaced by the faint light that filters in through unseen cracks and holes in the ceiling, but the feeling of dread remains. You imagine the ancient priests conducting ceremonies at the entrance, solemnly chanting, perhaps hoping that this time the labyrinth would be satisfied with its tribute. Why do people build labyrinths? The question nags at you as you walk. Is it the thrill of the unknown, the allure of getting lost, or merely the desire to keep something or someone inside? Some believe that labyrinths are meant for meditation, a way to find oneself through deliberate confusion. Others are convinced they are traps, designed to confuse enemies or contain monsters, both literal and figurative. As you move further into the maze, you cannot help but suspect that the answer is simpler and much less noble. People like to make things difficult for themselves and for others, and nothing is more difficult than a corridor that never leads where you think it will. Still, you continue. The air grows heavier, and the sounds from the outside world fade until there is nothing left but your own breathing and the slow, persistent drip of water somewhere in the distance. The labyrinth is patient. It waits, as it always has, for the next legend to take shape in its endless, winding halls. You press onward, the world behind you slowly dissolving into a faint memory, replaced by stone walls that seem to turn in upon themselves. It becomes quickly apparent that this labyrinth was not designed for the convenience of visitors. Every corridor appears to double back. Every chamber is suspiciously similar to the last, and the concept of progress is reduced to the act of simply not sitting down and giving up entirely. Your only companions are your memories and the uneasy knowledge that these walls have witnessed far more interesting tragedies than your own. As your feet shuffle along the uneven floor, you find your thoughts looping back to the many versions of the labyrinth's most famous legend. The Greeks, with their boundless creativity and well documented fondness for dramatic endings, were incapable of telling a simple story without at least a handful of variations. In the best known version, the Minotaur waits at the center of the maze, a living testament to a family tree that was as tangled as the corridors themselves. The Minotaur, half man and half bull, is less a monster and more a metaphor for mistakes that cannot be hidden. King Minos, unable to deal with the consequences of his wife's peculiar affections and the resulting offspring, commissions the labyrinth not only as a prison, but as a monument to denial. You remember the tale of Ariadne, who gave Theseus a ball of thread so he could find his way out, as if the greatest threat of the maze was not the creature within, but simply not knowing how to retrace one's steps. Theseus, celebrated as a hero, spends less time in the myth fighting the Minotaur than he does relying on the cleverness of someone else. It is not hard to feel some sympathy for the Minotaur, condemned to wander in circles for crimes it did not choose, waiting for a hero who could only succeed with help. Ancient storytellers seem less interested in logic and more in the spectacle of fate, ensuring that every participant is both a victim and a villain, depending on who tells the tale. There is something almost reassuring in the realization that the ancient world was no less confused than the modern one. Historians, sifting through fragments of pottery and faded murals, debate endlessly about what the labyrinth represented. Was it a temple, a prison, or merely the fever dream of a builder with too much time and too little supervision? The cult of the bull was a very real phenomenon in Minoan Crete. Frescoes depict acrobats leaping over horned beasts, priests clad in elaborate costumes, and crowds gathered to witness spectacles both religious and ridiculous. The Minotaur, for all its monstrous fame, may have simply been the echo of ancient rituals now lost to dust and speculation. You pass a niche in the wall where centuries ago someone left offerings, a small clay vessel, a handful of animal bones, a few faded beads strung together on a rotting cord. Perhaps they prayed for protection from the beast, or perhaps they prayed for the beast itself, trapped and alone. The line between sacrifice and mercy is thin, and the labyrinth seems to thrive on such ambiguities. The remains are humble, easily overlooked by all but the most desperate archaeologists, yet they are a silent testament to the very real fears and hopes of those who came before. It is hard to ignore the way your own footsteps echo down the stone corridors, magnified by architecture designed less for function than for atmosphere. Every sound is swallowed, then returned with an unsettling delay, as if something in the darkness is mimicking your every move. You begin to understand how easy it would be to lose yourself, not just physically, but mentally. The labyrinth is a machine built to encourage doubt, to make every decision feel questionable, every path a possible mistake. The deeper you wander, the more the boundaries between myth and reality blur. You recall how the Greeks delighted in creating stories where truth was less important than the lesson. Monsters were rarely just monsters. They were metaphors for human weaknesses, for fears that could not be named. The Minotaur might have represented the unknown, the things that wait in the dark corners of the mind. The labyrinth, then, is simply the map of confusion, the structure that guarantees no one escapes unchanged. Archaeological evidence offers only limited comfort. The ruins of Knossos, the heart of ancient Crete, contain rooms that twist and turn in ways that defy easy explanation. Scholars argue whether these were the remnants of the original labyrinth or merely the result of rebuilding after yet another earthquake. Clay tablets record lists of offerings, names of forgotten gods, accounts of ceremonies so elaborate they border on parody. No two experts can agree on the purpose of the place, and so the legend persists, untethered to facts, floating somewhere between history and dream. You pause before a particularly dark passage, marked by carvings whose meanings have been debated for generations. Some say they are warnings, others claim they are instructions, and a few simply see random scratches made by bored guards. The uncertainty is appropriate given the setting. If the labyrinth teaches anything, it is that certainty is a luxury for those who have never been truly lost. Was the Minotaur a villain or merely a victim of other people's choices? Was Ariadne a savior or just another pawn in a game played by gods and kings? Was Theseus a hero or a man who got lucky? The labyrinth offers no answers, only more corridors, more chances to question everything you thought you knew. You walk on, surrounded by the tangled legacy of countless stories, each one insisting it is the truth, each one leaving you just a little more lost than before. The labyrinth has no interest in what you believe. It only asks that you keep walking, that you keep searching for meaning in the endless repetition of stone and shadow. The labyrinth breathes around you, its air thickening, the silence growing louder. Your footsteps have become less certain, and with every slow, careful stride, you wonder if the walls themselves are inching closer, eager to eavesdrop on your thoughts. Light fades more quickly now. Whatever trickles through cracks in the ancient stones is devoured by the greedy corridors, leaving you to the mercy of your own sense of direction, a sense that here is as trustworthy as a riddle inscribed by a long dead trickster. You are keenly aware that this is no ordinary maze. It is an artifact of engineering genius, or, depending on one's view, engineering malice. The Minoans, whose name itself is a product of centuries of eager misinterpretation, are often credited with constructing the labyrinth to house a monster. But was it a prison or a riddle, a sacred path or an elaborate ploy to keep unwelcome guests occupied until they either starved or lost their sanity? The answer, predictably, has vanished into the gaps between myth and masonry. Archaeologists, whose tireless work seldom wins them glory, but frequently earns them heat stroke, have devoted entire lives to piecing together the truth. Their best guess, the palace at Knossos, was a sprawling, multi-storied complex filled with corridors and stairways, rooms that led to more rooms, some of them little more than cupboards, others so grand that even modern architects would be forced to admit a twinge of envy. Perhaps the labyrinth was never a single, neatly bounded structure, but rather the cumulative confusion of centuries of renovations, earthquakes, and the relentless urge of every ruler to leave his own mark, regardless of whether anyone could still find the dining hall afterward. Your hand trails along the damp stone wall. It is cool, almost clammy, and for a moment you fancy you feel the faintest pulse, a memory perhaps of hands just like yours, centuries ago, grasping desperately for a way out. The stones are not smooth. Here and there you find the rough patch of a chisel mark, or the rounded depression where generations of fingertips have left their own shallow imprint. The maze remembers its visitors far better than any guidebook could. There are moments when you catch glimpses of ancient tragedy preserved within these walls. You pass a pile of broken pottery, once a vessel for oil or wine, now nothing more than jagged reminders of hospitality gone wrong. There is a length of corroded bronze, so thoroughly fused to the stone that it must have lain here since the earliest days, perhaps dropped by someone running from a shadow that never quite caught up. At a turn in the passage, you find an alcove with the remains of what may have been a torch, blackened and crumbling, the last echo of a journey that ended before it began. It is impossible not to imagine those who vanished here. Myths tell of young men and women sent as tribute, their names lost to time. The official story is that they were sacrifices to the Minotaur. The more mundane truth, perhaps, is that they simply disappeared one by one, as people do in all confusing and hostile places. Later chroniclers, uncomfortable with the banality of death by misadventure, embroidered the facts with monsters and heroes. The labyrinth did not mind. It swallowed their stories as easily as it swallowed their footsteps. You are reminded that no one can agree on what the labyrinth was for. Some modern scholars propose that it was a ceremonial space, its complexity a deliberate test for initiates seeking enlightenment, or simply the nearest exit. Others suggest it was a treasury, its secrets guarded not by a monster, but by a baffling floor plan, and the certainty that no thief could ever find his way out again. There are those who point to the labyrinth's resemblance to the circuits of the human brain, seeing in its twists and turns a reflection of the confusion and contradiction at the heart of human consciousness. The walls offer no answers. They have heard all the theories before and remain stubbornly unmoved. The stories of those lost here are many. Archaeological journals record the fate of more than one would-be explorer who entered with confidence and emerged, if at all, chastened and silent. There is the tale of the 19th century Englishman who believed he could map the entire maze in a single afternoon, only to be rescued at dawn the next morning, his pockets filled with hasty sketches and his mind noticeably less certain. There is the account of the archaeologist whose notes stop abruptly midway through a description of a particularly narrow corridor. No one knows what became of him, but his colleagues quietly avoid the topic at professional conferences. You are aware, as you wander, that fear is not always rational. The Minotaur, for all its mythic horror, was never seen by any living soul, yet its presence still haunts every curve of the labyrinth. It is possible, you think, that the monster was never meant to be real. Instead, it was the idea of a monster that mattered, a shape to inhabit the darkness, a reason to turn back when courage faltered. The Greeks excelled at giving fear a face. If you cannot name your terror, how can you hope to outwit it? From time to time, the echo of your steps seems to grow louder, as if the labyrinth itself is moving in time with you. In the darkness, every sound becomes suspect. Your own breathing, steady but growing faster, is a reminder that you are a living participant in a story that is older than memory. If the Minotaur was not real, the terror it inspired certainly was. The labyrinth functions perfectly, whether or not a monster waits at its heart. It exists to make you feel lost, and in that purpose it has never failed. You imagine, for a moment, what it would have been like for the Minotaur if, by some cosmic joke, the monster were real. What would it have thought of this endless wandering, this exile inside a riddle? Would it have known fear or boredom or only the endless hunger of something made to be hated? Perhaps you muse, what the Minotaur really needed was not a victim, but a guide, a patient soul to lead it to the sunlight and show it that even monsters deserve a way out. But the labyrinth is not kind. It remembers every footstep, every cry, every act of bravery or cowardice. It does not judge, but it does not forgive. You press on, the shadows growing deeper, the echoes louder. Somewhere ahead, the story continues, waiting for its next victim, or its next hero, or perhaps just the next person willing to get lost for the sake of history. You wander deeper, feeling as though you are traversing the boundary between what was once believed and what is simply real, though the difference grows increasingly irrelevant the further you go. The corridors narrow, the walls drip with moisture, as if the stone itself is sweating from holding so many secrets for so many centuries. There are places now where the light does not reach at all, and your own shadow becomes both companion and adversary, stretching ahead as a guide, then folding behind you like a reminder of all who have been lost here before. At first, you think it is merely your imagination, the fatigue of endless corridors playing tricks with your perception. But sometimes, in those liminal corners where the stones curve and the silence gathers, you glimpse movement, shapes that are not entirely human nor entirely beast. A figure that passes from one patch of gloom to another, horns glinting in the half light, feet dragging in a pattern not quite like a man's. The Minotaur, of course, is a fable, an invention layered over generations of retelling. Yet as you blink and the form evaporates into mere darkness, it is not so easy to believe that only facts populate this maze. The mind is creative, and fear is its oldest muse. You pause, reminding yourself that monsters are often nothing but projections of the human mind, shaped by need and imagination. The ancients were masters at this. They invented entire pantheons to explain storms, plagues, the simple tragedy of mortality. The labyrinth, for all its physical complexity, is at least as much a device of psychology as it is of engineering. Here, people confronted their greatest terror, the unknown, the place beyond the reach of memory or map, where even hope was only a rumor. In a way, this is the lesson of every labyrinth, ancient or modern. It is not the length of the corridors or the number of turns that matters, but the way uncertainty feeds the imagination. You reflect on the Greeks who wove stories out of shadows, gods who punished the proud, kings who built prisons for their problems, heroes whose victories never seem to last. Their stories endure because they are not about monsters at all, but about the cost of confronting darkness without a guarantee of daylight on the other side. You stop at a crossroads, 4 passages radiating away like the points of a compass. You recall that over centuries, many have tried to recreate the Knossos labyrinth. Scholars and showmen from many nations, Italians, French, English, even an enterprising German count, have drawn elaborate diagrams, speculated on secret doors and hidden chambers, and of course, boasted that they alone had solved the riddle of its plan. Some dug tunnels of their own, convinced that the original labyrinth must still be buried beneath the dust and olive roots. Each attempt was met with new confusion: walls that led nowhere, floors that collapsed into emptiness, mysterious carvings that yielded only more questions. Even today, tourists peer down into sunken chambers and run their fingers along weathered stones, hoping to feel a twinge of mystery, a little shiver of fear. Your hand brushes a piece of ancient pottery, half embedded in the mud, its painted patterns long since worn away, its shape more suggestion than vessel. Here, too, are fragments of stone statuary, a bull's head, eroded to near anonymity, a coil of labyrinthine pattern, so precise that it could only have been carved by someone with far more patience than you possess. There are lumps of bronze green with age, once ceremonial weapons, or perhaps mere decorations for a forgotten festival. These relics do not speak directly, but their silence is eloquent. Each is a question left behind by someone who surely never imagined their possessions would outlast their name. You move forward, past another set of blind turns, and the walls grow slicker, colder. A low hum vibrates through the stone, a trick of acoustics, perhaps, or the sound of countless voices murmuring just beyond the range of comprehension. In these moments, the Minotaur becomes not a creature of flesh, but a presence, a feeling of pressure in the chest and unease in the bones, fear of being lost, fear of never being found, the oldest fear of all, that perhaps you are the monster and the labyrinth is your punishment. With each uncertain step, you become more aware that much of human history has been built atop such anxieties. The urge to draw maps, to assign names, to build myths around the things we cannot understand. It is a compulsion as ancient as fire. The Minoans and their successors may have worshipped bulls and danced in labyrinths, but so too do modern people build puzzles to amuse or distract themselves, to prove that they are not entirely powerless in the face of confusion. The labyrinth is a mirror. What you fear, you meet. What you seek, you may never find. You think of the archaeologists stumbling through these same corridors with their notebooks and hammers, each certain they would be the one to uncover the truth. The stone chips and the broken amphorae they discovered told stories, though never the stories anyone truly wanted. One found a hidden room with walls painted in spirals, only to realize they contained nothing but dust and disappointment. Another spent years reconstructing a single piece of pottery, only to see it crumble when touched by sunlight. Even now, every excavation is part search for truth, part exercise in humility. The labyrinth does not reveal itself to those who are merely curious. It keeps its real secrets for those who lose themselves entirely. As you round yet another corner, you try to remember which direction you came from. The effort is pointless, and soon you give up, content to let the labyrinth have its way with you. Perhaps this is the greatest irony, that the Minotaur, if it ever existed, was not the true threat. It was the people who built the maze, and those who insisted on returning again and again, trying to solve a puzzle that does not wish to be solved. In this, the labyrinth is as modern as it is ancient, a reminder that no matter how much history is uncovered, there are always places where the past slips away, refusing to be tidied into a single comforting story. Your fear has changed now. It is no longer terror of monsters, but the dull ache of uncertainty, the exhaustion of endless choice. Each passage offers a promise and a threat. Each shadow holds both memory and forgetting, and you, like so many before, are simply a witness, stumbling forward, drawn onward by the hope that perhaps the next corner will reveal something true. But the labyrinth is patient. It will outlast you as it has outlasted kings and monsters, archaeologists and tourists. It will continue to twist and turn, not to trap you, but to remind you that some mysteries are more valuable unsolved. You do not remember when the corridor first began to slope upward, nor can you say how many turns or false passages you have ignored on the way. Time, which outside the labyrinth always insists on moving forward, here becomes slippery, as if the walls themselves have stolen some of it for their own slow process of crumbling. At last, after an eternity that might have lasted less than an hour or more than a lifetime, you see the faint suggestion of light that is not born of your imagination or the feverish glow of hope. It is the exit. You recognize it by the way the air changes, the faint hint of salt and wildflowers carried from beyond the ruined doorway, the breeze teasing the cobwebs from your hair. The light outside is not bright, but it is honest. As you step across the threshold, leaving the shadows behind, you are greeted not by applause, nor by the judgment of ancient gods, but by the ordinary indifference of the sun-drenched hillside. Somewhere in the distance, the sea murmurs. The labyrinth, unbothered, resumes its patient waiting for the next visitor. For a moment, you pause on the threshold and look back. It is difficult to say what you have gained, if anything. You are unchanged to the casual observer, yet you feel the unmistakable weight of myth clinging to you, as if the dust of ages has settled into your bones. You reflect that this is what myths are for, not to teach exactly, but to comfort the human urge for pattern, for explanation, for sense amid the ordinary chaos of existence. You wonder what it meant to the Minoans to build such a place. Was it, as some historians argue, a way to placate inscrutable gods with the confusion of mortals? Was it perhaps a grand display of architectural prowess, an exercise in power and patience? Or was it, as the most cynical scholars insist, merely a convenient dumping ground for inconvenient stories, monsters, sacrifices, unexplainable tragedies, all tidied away behind a riddle of stone? Yet, as you let your gaze wander across the landscape, you remember that Crete itself is no stranger to disaster. The island's history is woven through with catastrophe, earthquakes that tore apart cities, tsunamis that swept away entire villages, the eruption of distant Santorini, whose ash turned the sky black and may have marked the beginning of the end for the Minoan world. There are scholars who argue in their cautious and endlessly footnoted prose that the myths of the labyrinth and the Minotaur are really memories of these calamities, that the monster at the heart of the maze was the chaos of nature itself, and the sacrifices were the attempts of ordinary people to hold back the tide of destruction with ritual and story. It is not a comforting thought. Myths are supposed to shield us from the meaninglessness of disaster, not remind us that it is always lurking just beyond the reach of reason. Yet perhaps this too is the point. By building their stories into the very stones of their palaces, the people of Crete made a bargain with time that even if they could not control the forces that threatened them, they could at least ensure that they would be remembered, not for their victories, but for their persistence in the face of confusion. You sit on a fallen block of stone, letting your mind drift through the centuries. The labyrinth behind you is now a ruin, a collection of crumbling passages that have lost much of their menace in the bright daylight. Tourists will come, archaeologists will measure and map, children will run through the open chambers and shout the name of the Minotaur, and history will continue its slow erosion of fact into legend, and legend into marketing. Indeed, you reflect, the modern fate of the labyrinth is a peculiar one. What was once a sight of dread and wonder is now an attraction, complete with signs and ticket booths. Archaeological digs alternate with photo opportunities. The myths, once shrouded in religious awe, are now reduced to cartoon monsters and souvenir mugs. Still, you suspect that a little of the original magic remains. The labyrinth is patient. It has seen empires rise and fall, and it is not threatened by the presence of a few camera wielding visitors. If anything, it finds their confusion amusing. You recall the stories of early explorers, those earnest Victorians who arrived with shovels and Latin grammars, determined to reveal the truth of the labyrinth once and for all. They found walls, corridors, the remains of long forgotten rituals, but the truth, as always, slipped away. Some grew convinced that the real labyrinth was a metaphor, a puzzle designed to be unsolvable. Others accused their rivals of hiding discoveries or misreading inscriptions. The debates continue, with new technology adding new layers of complexity but little certainty. Ground penetrating radar, satellite imagery, three-dimensional models all have failed to settle the matter. The labyrinth endures, not as a problem to be solved, but as an invitation to keep searching. Perhaps, you muse, this is the greatest trick the ancients ever played. To leave behind a question so seductive that it cannot be left alone, a puzzle that outlasts every attempt to answer it. The Minotaur, the sacrifices, the clever thread of Ariadne, these are only details. The real story is the persistence of uncertainty, The way people keep returning to the same place, century after century, looking for a meaning that is always just around the next corner. You stand up and brush the dust from your hands. Behind you, the labyrinth settles into silence, content to wait for the next traveler. You have learned nothing that can be written in a guidebook, nothing that will earn you a footnote in an archaeological journal. Yet you have walked the corridors, heard the echoes, and let the old fears brush against you. That, you decide, is enough. As you walk away, you wonder if perhaps everyone carries a labyrinth within. Some puzzles are meant to be solved, but others are there simply to remind us that mystery is part of what it means to be human. The sun is warm, the sea is near, and the story, whatever it was meant to mean, continues, patient and unresolved, beneath the stones of ancient Crete.